Well, greetings out there in YouTube land, and welcome to this part 2 video on the conversion of the Bell & Howell Model 385 projector amplifier into an optimized guitar amplifier. In this video, we're going to see how the removal of all these parts and the addition of some new parts into our circuit will turn this old projector amp into a really great sounding guitar amplifier. If that sounds interesting, please stay tuned. Hey Rusty, are you anxious to help with this video? Huh, guess not. At the conclusion of our first video, we had an amplifier with two very different performing 6v6 tubes. One was on the verge of red plating and the other seemed rather cool. So before we try to optimize this amplifier, we're going to have to correct that disparity in tube bias. Here are all the measurements of the original bias as the tubes were in the amplifier when it came to me. You can look over these values, but the point is that one of the 6v6s was operating at 15.6 watts of plate dissipation, which is 30% high. The other was at 9.9, which is about 17.5% low. This is not an acceptable disparity. And from what I understand from viewer comments, this is not unusual, particularly with this amp. Why it's not unusual, I don't know, but if you have one of these amps, I suggest that you check your tube bias very quickly if you haven't already. Now, while it's possible to independently cathode bias each of these 6v6s and bring them back to normal, I thought it best to hunt down from my tube stash a pair of much better matched 6v6s and install them. It was obvious to me that, like an old married couple, these tubes had aged differently and grown apart. So I went to the stash and started testing different 6v6s and came up with this pair. If you notice, the voltage drop is much closer than this one was, and the plate dissipation values 11.82 for the previously almost red plating tube position, which is about 1.5% low, and the other one is at 12.55, which is about 4.6% high. So we're within plus or minus 5% of the optimum plate dissipation. Next, let's take a look at the schematic for the circuit, which is just as congested as the circuit itself. First off, I want to show you I'm using the M1 schematic. Bear in mind that there is a second schematic which looks very close to this called the M2, except that the M2 has two 8-ohm outputs instead of an 8 and 16, and there's a few other differences. So be sure you have the right schematic for your circuit. Now, looking at the M1 schematic, we see the 5879 preamp tube, which runs into two 12AX7s. The second stage of this one serving as a cathodiene phase inverter for the two 6v6 output tubes. As we've already discussed, the input jack is present here. It's called microphone, but we can use it for our guitar purpose. And over here we have an 8 and 16 ohm output impedance from our output transformer. I drilled out the 8 ohm jack so that it would accept the normal 1/4 inch plug, and now we have a nice 8 ohm output for our speakers. I guess you could also drill out the 16 ohm output if you wanted to use a speaker cabinet or something like that. I haven't done that because I'm just going to use a single 8 ohm speaker. Next, I'm going to draw your attention to a couple sections in this circuit which are not necessary and which do tend to add to the complexity. Number one, there is a neon bulb circuit here that can be removed. I'll show you where it is and how I removed it. Also, there is a 6v6 down here used as an oscillator which will help this unit read the sound that's on the side of the film that runs through the projector. We don't need this tube. We don't need this oscillator coil. Again, I'll show you how I replace them so that I would have some space to work and also to add a tremolo in this section right here by converting from a 6V6 tube base into a 6SL7 tube base. I'll go through how I did this and show you effectively step by step how this was done. Then there's one final part of this circuit I want to draw to your attention, which I think is very, very important. If you look up here, we have a negative feedback loop with a resistor and capacitor network that feeds back into this 12AX7, and I think this is responsible for the rather poor tone that we experienced with the original amp. The compressed tone, almost all mid-range, completely dead at the top end. I think that's the culprit, and we're going to take action to remedy that situation. Now, I decided to use a 6SL7 as the oscillator tube for my tremolo. I have a couple reasons for that. Number one, it will fit into the tube base of that the 6V6 occupied. The wiring's different, but I don't have to drill out and change my socket. Number two, I've never personally seen a tremolo that used a 6SL7 as an oscillator tube, so I thought it might be interesting. As you can see, the tubes couldn't be more different. The 6V6 is a beam power amplifier. Effectively, it looks like a pentode. If you watch my vacuum tube videos, you'll see it really isn't. But it has 5 components here and 2 no contact positions. The 6SL7 will remind you, I think, of a 12AX7 in that it is 2 separate tubes in one envelope, 2 separate triodes, which makes it ideal for our oscillator circuit. Okay, now if you notice, almost every connection is different though, so the tube socket had to be completely rewired to use the 6SL7 in this position. Next, I had to come up with a circuit for my tremolo, and I tried, I'm going to say 3 or 4 different circuits, actually creating kind of mock tremolo circuits and testing them in the amp itself. And the only one that worked properly for me was the one from the Fender Vibro Champ, as we see right here. It's based on a 12AX7. It uses this side over here, the triode, for the oscillator loop, and this side here is a DC coupled cathode follower, which then will insert the signal to the cathode of this second 12AX7 triode. Thanks, Jack. I hope it passed your sniff test. So I made some minor modifications to change this from 12AX7 to 6SL7 use, but in a few minutes we'll see how it turned out and how it sounds. I shot some video while optimizing this tremolo circuit, and I thought I would show a couple scenes to you so you can see the process by which I do this. And this is how I set up new circuits like this with jumpers, and I fit in the different parts that I need. Here I built the oscillation circuit, and with my clips I can connect it all together and then experiment with different potentiometers, different resistors and things like that to try to optimize the tone. I know it looks like a mess, but it actually makes pretty good sense, at least to me and to Rusty. Here's another look at that oscillator circuit for the tremolo. This is the speed control, and then over here I have the intensity control, and like I said, I'm experimenting and trying to get optimum values for the best possible sound. Let's take a look here at the finished amp. As you can see, externally there's only a few changes. I have a little flush mount pilot light. I'll show you from the inside how that was done. 2 mysterious potentiometers here coming through the Filmosound amplifier plate. Up here, a 6SL7 instead of a 6V6. We know that this is the tremolo tube. And on the rear, the drilled out output jack for our 8 ohm speaker, and another mysterious potentiometer, a purpose to be divulged soon. Now, turning the chassis over, we see that it's still pretty well congested, but slightly more orderly, I think, than it was. The 2 big can caps that had failed were removed, and individual axial electrolytic caps were installed over here, sort of in a bundle like cord wood. The oscillator coil was removed from this position. Here is the tremolo tube base, and we see over here the tremolo circuit for the oscillation loop is located horizontally in this position, where there's plenty of room for the base plate if necessary to clear the components. I moved the cathode biasing of the 6V6s from over here being part of the CAN capacitor array and put the biasing resistor and bypass cap right on the tube socket. Also, it's a lot easier to do the tube biasing when you have the contacts available to you like this. I also removed that neon bulb array from over here. It's just not necessary. It leaves you a little open space. And next I'm going to show you about that negative feedback loop. Now I'm going to have to go to handhold here for the negative feedback loop. It'll be a little shaky and I apologize. Here is the 22K resistor that's part of the negative feedback loop and that capacitor that formed the RC network. I left it intact because I could see no difference with or without the capacitor, and it connects right here to this lug of the 16 ohm speaker output. This resistor is all that's between the feedback from the output transformer back to that 12AX7 stage that preceded the phase inverter. And then I inserted a 100K potentiometer between the output transformer, negative feedback return, and the existing 22K ohm negative feedback resistor. Now, with this pot, I can crank it up to 122K of resistance, which effectively shuts down the NFB loop, or I can crank it down to 0 and we will have the original 22K resistor in place and be able to hear the amp as it was made and left the factory. I think you'll find that cutting down on the amount of negative feedback is going to really brighten the tone, increase the gain, and really turn this into a nice guitar amp. Next, while I'm still in handheld, I'll show you the 2 potentiometers I installed as a speed and intensity control right here next to the oscillation loop and with the tremolo tube right down here, so the leads are relatively short. Here's that flush mount pilot light that I installed. I run the wires down here to the filaments of the oscillator tube and use that 6.3 volts to illuminate the bulb. Now I'm just going to slowly sweep around here and to show you the details. There's many things that would take too long to explain, but I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. The majority of the circuit was left intact. This is an interesting feature right here. It's a resistor which allows you to alter your B+ and get it to exactly what the specifications require. You just loosen that screw and move this little sleeve back and forth and you can fine-tune your B+ voltage. Well, Jack and I are looking outside at the snowstorm and we're thinking it might be a good day to stay inside and work on some YouTube videos. So here we go. As you've seen in my videos, there are many positive attributes to living out here in the desert Southwest. One rather negative one, though, is when the temperature reaches 111.2 degrees, it makes the workshop a little bit stuffy. Okay, now we're out in the workshop. The amp is on. The tone control is straight up in the neutral position. The volume control's at about 3 out of 10, and the NFB loop is at the original 22K ohms of resistance. So this is going to sound pretty much like it did when it left the factory. Okay, now I've cranked up some more resistance into the NFB loop. It's around mid position right now. Okay, now I have the NFB loop at maximum 122K resistance, which in effect should stop the negative feedback. And now, just for quick comparison, I cranked it back to its original 22K resistance with plenty of negative feedback. Okay, now we'll try it with the tremolo on at a low speed and fairly low intensity. Now that was with the NFB loop at the original position. Now we'll try it with the NFB loop essentially shut down. Okay, now let's crank up the tremolo speed and intensity to about mid-range. That's with the NFB loop at 22K. Now we have the NFB loop at 122K. Okay, now we're going to crank the tremolo up to max and the speed at about a medium. That was with the NFB loop at 22K. Okay, now NFB loop at 122K, maximum intensity, medium speed. Well, that's about it for this part 2 video on the Bell & Howell Model 385 projector amplifier. I'm still fine-tuning the tremolo. It can be a little unstable at times. Sometimes it thumps and sometimes it doesn't, and I'm not sure why. But I will continue to work on this a bit and maybe down the road build a cabinet for it. If I do, I will share all that with you. I hope you found the video interesting and that you enjoyed watching it, and that you will join Rusty, Jack, and me for future videos. Until then, thanks for watching and bye for now. A friend of mine brought over a car to have some wiring work done on it, and I thought she might get a kick out of seeing it. It's a 1936 Chevrolet truck. Okay, it's an old-fashioned hot rod with the baby blue paint, obviously, and the flames that match the wheels. It's a early, around 1962 or so, 283 Chevy with a 4-barrel and the old ram's horn exhaust manifolds. No windshield wiper. It's going to need one. And inside, very small, kind of cramped for space. It's got a 700 R4 automatic transmission, Get the serape here for little color matching. Nice black tuck and roll underneath. And tonneau cover on the rear. Really nice fenders. It's an all metal car. And although it's very difficult to work on because of the cramped space, I still have to say I rather enjoy it. Look at that pinstriping on the dash. It's kind of cute. That knob opens the windshield. It swings out, and that's sort of your air conditioning, okay, from what, about 80 years ago. So there it is. Another visitor to the workshop I thought you might get a kick out of.